Maya Thompson had been practicing her pitching arm since she was 7 years old, and now at 16, she could hit a target from 50 feet away with pinpoint accuracy. The worn baseball in her hand had been her constant companion through countless afternoons in the neighborhood park, where she'd spent hours perfecting her throw against the brick wall of the old community center. Her friends often joked that she had a better arm than half the boys on their school's baseball team, but Maya never saw it as a competition. For her, throwing was meditation, a way to clear her mind and feel completely in control of something in a world that often felt chaotic. That Tuesday evening, she was walking home from practice, tossing her ball up and catching it rhythmically when she decided to take a shortcut through the alley behind Merchant Street. Her mother had warned her about walking alone after dark, but the sun was still painting orange streaks across the sky, and she figured she had at least 20 minutes of good daylight left. The alley was one she'd walked through dozens of times, a narrow passage between 2 rows of buildings that cut her walk home by nearly 10 minutes. Old dumpsters lined one side, and fire escapes zigzagged up the brick walls like metal spiderwebs. As she entered the alley, something felt different. The usual sounds of the city seemed muted, and there was a tension in the air that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Maya's fingers tightened around her baseball as she walked, her senses suddenly alert. She could hear voices ahead, angry and aggressive, echoing off the brick walls. Every instinct pulled her to turn around, to take the long way home, but curiosity and concern pulled her forward. She moved quietly, staying close to the wall until she could see what was happening. 3 men had cornered someone against the dead-end wall. The victim was well-dressed, his expensive suit now disheveled, his briefcase lying open on the ground with papers scattered around it. Even from her position, Maya could see the fear in his eyes as the 3 attackers closed in. One of them held what looked like a knife, its blade catching the dying light. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was witnessing something terrible, something that could turn deadly in seconds. She knew she should run, call for help, do anything but stand there frozen. But Maya also knew that by the time help arrived, it might be too late. Time seemed to slow as Maya's mind raced through her options. She could hear one of the attackers demanding the man's wallet, his voice rough and threatening. The victim, despite his obvious fear, seemed to be resisting, which was only making the situation more volatile. Maya noticed the way the man in the expensive suit held himself. Even in terror, there was a certain dignity, a refusal to be completely broken. The attacker with the knife moved closer, and Maya saw the victim flinch backward, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. Her phone was in her pocket, and her first instinct was to call 911. But as she reached for it, she realized the harsh truth. The police were at least 5 minutes away, probably more given the traffic at this hour, and this situation wouldn't last 5 minutes. The man could be stabbed, beaten, or worse in the time it took for help to arrive. Maya felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, followed immediately by a surge of anger. This wasn't right. 3 men attacking 1 person, using violence to take what didn't belong to them. It violated everything she believed in about fairness and justice. She looked down at the baseball in her hand, feeling its familiar weight, the worn leather smooth against her palm. An idea formed, crazy and dangerous, but it was something. Maya had spent years learning to throw with precision, hours upon hours until she could hit a target the size of a coffee can from incredible distances. She'd never used her skill for anything like this, never imagined she would need to. But as she watched the scene unfold before her, she realized that all those hours of practice might have been preparing her for exactly this moment. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Maya assessed the situation with the same focus she used when facing a difficult target. The 3 attackers were positioned in a rough semicircle around their victim. The one with the knife was closest, about 30 feet from where she stood. The other 2 were slightly behind him, their attention completely focused on the man they'd cornered. None of them had noticed her yet, which gave her the element of surprise. If she could take out the one with the knife first, she might be able to create enough confusion to give the victim a chance to escape. Her hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the ball tighter. This wasn't practice, wasn't a game where missing meant running to retrieve the ball and trying again. This was real, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. But Maya had never been one to back down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. She thought of her grandmother, who had always told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Drawing on that wisdom and every ounce of skill she possessed, Maya stepped forward, wound up, and threw. The baseball left Maya's hand with all the force and accuracy she could muster, whistling through the air in a perfect arc. In the second it took to reach its target, Maya held her breath, watching the ball's trajectory with the same intensity she'd applied to countless practice throws. The satisfying sound of impact echoed through the alley as the ball struck the knife-wielding attacker squarely in the temple. The man's head snapped to the side, and he crumpled to the ground with a grunt of pain and surprise, the knife clattering away across the pavement. For a moment, everything froze. The other two attackers turned in confusion, trying to process what had just happened. The victim stood pressed against the wall, his eyes wide with shock. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she realized what she'd just done, and more importantly, what she needed to do next. She couldn't just stand there. She'd announced her presence with that throw, and now she was part of this confrontation whether she wanted to be or not. "Leave him alone," Maya shouted, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. She stepped fully into view, her stance wide and ready, though she had no ball left to throw. She was hoping that her boldness and the sight of their companion lying dazed on the ground would be enough to make them reconsider their attack. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed like it might work. The two remaining attackers looked at each other uncertainly, clearly not having expected any resistance, much less from a teenage girl. But then anger replaced confusion on their faces. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and tattoos creeping up his neck, started moving toward Maya with clear, hostile intent. "You little," he began, his voice filled with rage. The third attacker, shorter but stockier, moved to grab the victim, apparently deciding they'd finish their original business quickly before dealing with this unexpected interference. Maya's mind raced as she calculated distances and options, realizing with growing fear that she'd perhaps made things worse rather than better. The victim, however, had been given just enough time to recover from his shock. As the stocky attacker reached for him, he grabbed the briefcase at his feet and swung it hard, connecting with the man's midsection. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was enough to make the attacker stumble backward, buying precious seconds. Maya saw her chance and ran forward, not toward the tall man coming at her, but toward the scattered papers and the knife lying on the ground. If she could reach it first, they might have a real chance of defending themselves until help arrived. Maya dove for the knife just as the tall attacker lunged at her, her fingers closing around the handle as she rolled to the side. She'd never held a real weapon before, and the weight of it in her hand felt wrong, dangerous, and terrifying. She scrambled to her feet, holding it out in front of her with shaking hands, trying to look more confident than she felt. The tall man paused, reassessing the situation now that she was armed. His eyes narrowed, calculating whether a teenage girl with a knife posed a real threat. Behind him, the victim was locked in a struggle with the stocky attacker, the two men grappling against the alley wall. The first attacker, the one Maya had hit with her ball, was beginning to stir, groaning and holding his head. Maya realized with sinking certainty that they were running out of time. Even with the knife, she was badly outnumbered, and if all three attackers recovered and coordinated their efforts, she and the victim would be in serious trouble. "The police are coming," Maya shouted, hoping her lie sounded convincing. "I called them before I threw that ball. They'll be here any second." She was pleased to hear that her voice sounded steadier than she felt, carrying authority through the alley. The tall attacker hesitated, glancing back at his companions. It was the moment of uncertainty Maya had been hoping for, that split second where the risk-reward calculation shifted in their minds. The victim managed to push the stocky attacker away and stumbled toward Maya, breathing hard. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd initially thought, probably in his late 50s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that even now maintained a keen intelligence despite the fear and adrenaline. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, and his expensive suit was torn at the shoulder. But he stood straight, his jaw set with determination. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly to Maya, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. "Can you run?" She nodded, though her legs felt like jelly. Together, they started backing toward the alley entrance, Maya keeping the knife pointed at the attackers. The tall man was helping his dazed companion to his feet, while the stocky one was catching his breath. Maya could see them gathering themselves for another assault, and she knew she and the victim wouldn't make it to the street in time. Just as the attackers began to advance again, a new voice cut through the tension. "Hey, what's going on down there?" An older man had appeared at the mouth of the alley, backlit by the streetlights that were just beginning to flicker on. He held up his phone, making sure the attackers could see it. "I've got 911 on the line right now." Whether he actually did or was bluffing like Maya had, the effect was immediate and powerful. The three attackers exchanged quick glances, a wordless communication passing between them. The tall one cursed under his breath, then jerked his head toward the other end of the alley. They might have been willing to risk assaulting an older businessman and dealing with one brave teenager, but witnesses and imminent police arrival changed the equation entirely. As a group, they turned and ran, disappearing into the maze of alleys and side streets that characterized this part of the city. Their footsteps echoed and then faded, leaving behind an almost surreal silence. Maya's legs finally gave out, and she sat down heavily on the dirty alley floor, the knife slipping from her nerveless fingers. The adrenaline that had been powering her through the last few minutes drained away, leaving her shaking and suddenly aware of how close she'd come to serious harm. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as the reality of what had just happened crashed over her. She'd just attacked 3 grown men with a baseball and then held them off with a knife. It seemed impossible now, like something from a movie rather than her real life. The older man from the alley entrance hurried over, and Maya could now see he was wearing the uniform of a security guard from one of the nearby buildings. "Are you two all right? I've got real police on the way now. I saw the tail end of what happened from my station window." The victim extended a hand to help Maya to her feet, and she was surprised by the strength in his grip despite what he'd just been through. "Thanks to this young woman, I'm alive," the victim said, his voice thick with emotion. "She saved my life. They would have killed me for my wallet and watch." He turned to Maya, and she saw tears gathering in his eyes. "What's her name? I need to know the name of my guardian angel." Maya's throat felt tight as she managed to answer. "Maya Thompson, sir. I couldn't let them hurt you." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The security guard retrieved the fallen baseball and handed it to Maya, who clutched it like a lifeline. The victim was still staring at her with an expression of wonder and gratitude that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't a hero, she told herself. She'd just done what anyone should have done in that situation, though a small voice in her head whispered that most people would have run or hidden or simply looked the other way. The next hour passed in a blur of police officers, statements, and questions. Maya sat on the back bumper of an ambulance while a paramedic checked her for injuries, finding nothing but some scrapes on her palms from when she dove for the knife. The victim, who had finally introduced himself as Richard Chen, was being treated for the cut on his head and various bruises. Police photographers documented the scene while detectives questioned both of them separately, then together, piecing together exactly what had happened. Maya's mother arrived in a panic, having been called by the police. She swept Maya into a fierce hug, then pulled back to check her over with frantic hands, as if not quite believing the police officer's assurance that her daughter was unharmed. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice breaking between anger and relief. "You could have been killed. Those men had a knife, Maya." But even as she scolded, tears streamed down her face, and she pulled Maya close again. Detective Sarah Morrison, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, walked over to them. "Mrs. Thompson, I know this is difficult, but your daughter did something incredibly brave tonight. Her actions almost certainly saved Mr. Chen's life. Those men have been linked to 3 other violent robberies in this area, and we believe they might have escalated to murder if Maya hadn't intervened." She turned to Maya with a smile. "That's some throwing arm you've got there. One of the officers found your ball." The first attacker is being treated for a concussion. Richard Chen approached them, now cleaned up and bandaged, though he still looked shaken. A woman in a sharp business suit stood beside him, speaking urgently into her phone. Mrs. Thompson, Maya, Richard began, his formal tone suggesting he was more comfortable with business than emotion. I cannot adequately express my gratitude. Your daughter's courage and quick thinking gave me a second chance at life. I'd like to do something for her, for both of you, to show my appreciation. Maya's mother straightened, her protective instincts immediately alert. That's not necessary, Mr. Chen. I'm just grateful Maya is safe, and that you are too. We don't need any reward. But Richard shook his head firmly. Please let me explain. I'm in a position to help, and it would mean a great deal to me. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I'm the CEO of Chen Technologies. I don't know if you're familiar with the company, but we're in a position to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. The name was familiar to Maya. Chen Technologies was one of the biggest tech companies in the region, known for both its innovative products and its philanthropy. The realization that she'd saved a billionaire was surreal, almost laughable. She'd seen him as just a person in trouble, someone who needed help. The fact that he was wealthy and powerful hadn't factored into her decision for even a second. Looking at him now, vulnerable and grateful, she could only see a fellow human being who'd been shown the darker side of the city they both called home. 2 weeks later, Maya found herself sitting in a conference room on the 45th floor of the Chen Technologies building, feeling completely out of place. Her mother sat beside her, equally uncomfortable in this world of glass walls, expensive art, and panoramic city views. They'd been invited to meet with Richard Chen again, though he'd been vague about the purpose beyond, wanting to properly thank them. Maya had almost declined, preferring to put the whole frightening experience behind her, but her mother's curiosity had won out. Richard entered with a warm smile, accompanied by the same woman in the business suit from the night of the attack. Maya, Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming. This is Jennifer Park, my chief operating officer, and the person who actually keeps this company running. Jennifer smiled and shook their hands before taking a seat. Richard sat across from them, his manner earnest. I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about what happened in that alley. I've also spent that time learning about you, Maya, and I hope you don't find that intrusive. He opened a folder on the table. You're 16 years old, a junior at Lincoln High School. You maintain a 3.8 GPA while playing softball and volunteering at the community center where you first learned to throw. Your coach says you have college-level talent, but that your family's financial situation makes athletic scholarships your only realistic path to higher education. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. The accuracy of his information was both impressive and slightly unsettling. Mr. Chen, her mother began, her voice tight, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not comfortable with. Richard held up a hand apologetically. Please let me explain. I'm not trying to be invasive. I'm trying to understand how I can help in a way that's actually meaningful. Maya, you used a skill you've spent years developing to save my life. You didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk, didn't think about what you might gain. You just acted because it was right. That kind of character is rare, and it deserves to be supported. Jennifer leaned forward, her expression businesslike but not unkind. What Mr. Chen is proposing is a full scholarship program, not just for you, Maya, but as something we're establishing in your name at Lincoln High. The Maya Thompson Courage Scholarship would provide full tuition, room, and board to any college in the country for you, plus ongoing support for 3 other Lincoln students annually who demonstrate both academic promise and strength of character. The room seemed to spin as Maya tried to process what she was hearing. Additionally, Richard continued, we'd like to establish a sports program at your community center, with proper equipment, coaching, and facilities. You mentioned in your police statement that the center is where you learn to throw, where you spend your childhood. I'd like to ensure other kids have that same opportunity. Maya's mother had tears in her eyes, one hand pressed to her mouth. Maya herself couldn't speak, couldn't quite believe this was real. She'd saved someone's life, and somehow that single act was transforming her entire future. The news coverage was intense and uncomfortable. Teen hero saves tech billionaire with baseball, read one headline. The throw that changed everything, proclaimed another. Maya's face was plastered across local news stations, her story retold again and again, each version somehow more dramatic than the last. She returned to school to find herself simultaneously celebrated and resented, her classmates either treating her like a celebrity or whispering that she was only getting ahead because she'd been in the right place at the right time. The attention made her skin crawl. She'd never sought fame or recognition, had only wanted to help someone in trouble. Now strangers recognized her on the street, wanted selfies, asked her to autograph baseballs. Her social media, which she'd barely used before, exploded with followers and messages, some supportive, others cruel. "You think you're better than everyone now?" one message read. "Must be nice to get everything handed to you just for throwing a ball," said another. The negativity stung more than Maya wanted to admit. Her teammates on the softball team were split in their reactions. Some were genuinely happy for her and excited about the new sports program that was being built at the community center. Others seemed to view her scholarship as unearned, as if luck rather than courage and skill had created her opportunity. Coach Martinez pulled her aside one day after practice, her expression concerned. "How are you holding up? This kind of attention can be overwhelming, especially when you didn't ask for it." Maya found herself confiding feelings she hadn't even fully articulated to herself yet. "I just wanted to help someone. I didn't think about what would come after. I didn't want to be famous or have everyone talking about me. And now some people think I'm getting things I don't deserve, like I'm taking advantage of what happened. But I wasn't trying to get anything. I was just trying to stop someone from being hurt." Her voice cracked, and she was mortified to feel tears welling up. Coach Martinez pulled her into a hug. "Listen to me. What you did took incredible courage. You saw someone in danger and you acted, knowing you could get hurt. The fact that good things are coming from that doesn't diminish what you did, and it doesn't mean you don't deserve them. Richard Chun is giving you opportunities because he recognizes your character, not just because you saved him. Anyone who can't see that is speaking from their own insecurity." The words helped, but Maya still felt the weight of everyone's expectations and opinions pressing down on her. 6 months after the attack, Maya stood at the grand opening of the new athletic center at her community center, watching kids stream through the doors to see the new gymnasium, baseball diamond, and training facilities that had been built. Richard Chun stood beside her, looking more pleased than she'd ever seen him. "This is what it was all about," he said quietly. "Not just helping you, though that matters immensely to me, but creating something that will impact hundreds of kids over the years. You showed me something important that night in the alley." Maya turned to look at him curiously. "What did I show you?" Richard smiled, a bit sadly. "Before that night, I'd become disconnected from what really matters. I spent my time in boardrooms and at galas, surrounded by other wealthy people, making decisions that affected thousands of employees but feeling increasingly distant from actual human connection. I'd forgotten what it meant to need help, to be vulnerable, to be at the mercy of others' choices. And then you, a teenager with nothing to gain and everything to lose, chose to risk yourself for a stranger." He gestured at the children running and laughing in the new facilities. "You reminded me that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, and that real courage isn't about having resources or power. It's about choosing to do the right thing regardless of the cost. So this center, your scholarship program, these aren't just about paying you back. They're about paying forward the lesson you taught me. If we can help even one more person develop the kind of character you demonstrated, we've made the world measurably better." Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion. She thought about that night in the alley, how terrified she'd been, how her hands had shaken as she held that knife. She'd never felt less like a hero. But standing here now, watching the impact of that single decision ripple outward, she was beginning to understand what Richard meant. Courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about acting despite the fear, about choosing to help even when it was hard or dangerous or uncomfortable. The first recipients of the Maya Thompson Courage Scholarship had been announced the previous week. 3 students from Lincoln High, each with their own story of overcoming adversity and standing up for what was right, would have their college education fully funded. Maya had met them all, had seen her own younger self reflected in their eyes, the hope, the disbelief, the dawning realization that their lives were about to change. She understood now that her moment of courage had created a ripple effect she never could have imagined. 1 year after the attack, Maya returned to the alley where it had all happened. She stood at the spot where she'd made the decision to throw her ball, to intervene, to risk everything for a stranger. The alley looked different now, somehow less sinister in the late afternoon light. The dumpsters were still there, the brick walls unchanged, but the fear and danger she remembered seemed to have faded into something more distant, more dreamlike. She'd brought her baseball with her, the same one she'd used that night. It had been returned to her by the police after being held as evidence, and now it sat in a display case in the new community center, a symbol of what one person could do when they chose courage over caution. But she'd asked to borrow it today for this private moment of reflection. She tossed it up and caught it, the familiar motion grounding her, connecting her present self to the scared but determined girl who'd stood in this spot 12 months ago. Richard had asked her to speak at a charity gala the next week, one of many public appearances that had become part of her life. She'd spent weeks agonizing over what to say, what wisdom she could possibly offer when she still felt like she was figuring everything out herself. But standing here in this alley, the words finally came to her. She would tell them that heroism isn't about being special or exceptional. It's about the choice to act when action is needed, the choice to care when caring is difficult. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget, college tour tomorrow. USC is excited to meet you." Maya smiled, still hardly believing that she had her pick of schools, that financial constraints were no longer dictating her future. She decided to study social work, inspired by how much impact one person's intervention could have. If she could help people the way Richard had helped her, the way she'd helped him, maybe she could create her own ripple effect of positive change. As she turned to leave the alley, Maya noticed a young woman standing at the entrance, watching her. The woman approached hesitantly. "You're her, aren't you? The girl who saved that man." Maya nodded, bracing herself for whatever would come next, praise, criticism, another request for a selfie. But the woman surprised her. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not for what you did for him, though that was incredible. Thank you for showing people like me, regular people without power or money, that we can make a difference. I used to walk past problems, telling myself it wasn't my business, or that someone else would handle it. But after hearing your story, I stopped a guy from harassing a woman on the subway. It wasn't as dramatic as what you did, but she thanked me with tears in her eyes. You inspired that." Maya felt her own eyes fill with tears as she impulsively hugged the woman. This, she realized, was the real impact of that night in the alley. Not the scholarship or the news coverage or the new facilities, though those were wonderful. The real impact was in changing how people saw themselves and their capacity to affect the world around them. She'd been given an extraordinary platform, but the message was beautifully ordinary. Courage is a choice, heroism is action, and every single person has the power to make things better. As Maya walked out of the alley for what she promised herself would be the last time, she needed to move forward, not keep looking back. She gripped her baseball tightly. She thought about the young girl who'd spent countless hours learning to throw, never imagining where that skill would lead. She thought about fear and bravery, about luck and choice, about the butterfly effect of one good decision. And she smiled, ready to see where the next chapter of her story would take her, knowing that whatever came, she had the courage to face it. The sun was setting as she reached the street, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded her of the evening when everything changed. Maya Thompson, once just a girl with a good throwing arm and a kind heart, now understood what she'd always had the potential to become, someone who made the world a little better simply by being in it, someone who chose courage when it mattered most. And that, she thought as she headed home to her mother and the future waiting for them both, was the greatest gift of all.